Welcome to Gettin Legal With It, a podcast for Colorado young lawyers by Colorado young lawyers. I'm your host, Kevin Chaney. For those listening to us for the first time, I'm a personal injury and criminal defense lawyer here in Colorado. I graduated from the University of Colorado Law School in 2014 and founded my practice, Chaney, Galuzzi & Howard, LLC, a short time later. I'm a member of the Colorado Trial Lawyers Association, where I serve on its board, executive committee, and legislative committee. I also serve on the Colorado Bar Association's Board of Governors, the CBA Executive Committee, and the CBA Young Lawyers Division Executive Council. Finally, I'm also a member of the Colorado Criminal Defense Bar Association. If you're interested in learning more about any of these wonderful organizations, please feel free to shoot me an email at kevin@cghlawfirm.com. This podcast is created and sponsored by the Colorado Bar Association's Young Lawyers Division. Our goal with this podcast is to bring you bi-weekly episodes with information that is both fun and informative for young lawyers. We have some awesome guests lined up, and we are just getting started. Finally, if you like our podcast, please leave us a review and tell your colleagues. And with that, let's jump right in. I'm so excited for our guest today, who is also a member of the Colorado Bar Association YLD's Executive Council, Tanya Sevy. As a member of the trial section of Moye White, Tanya focuses her practice on general commercial litigation. She handles all aspects of a case from initial assessment, discovery and depositions, through trial, and everything in between. Tanya has experience defending discrimination in Section 1983 actions, negligence claims involving personal injury and property damage, and cases involving breaches of contract and business disputes. Prior to joining Moye White, Tanya worked at a regional firm where she experienced in a wide variety of areas, including employment litigation. Additionally, she clerked for the Honorable Ross Buchanan in Denver District Court. Tanya is an active hunter-jumper equestrian and an amateur ballet dancer. She also runs recreationally and occasionally participates in races. Tanya, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be here, Kevin.
How's your day going so far?
Pretty well. And yours?
Oh, not too bad. Not too bad. It's Friday, so no complaints. Why don't we jump right in? I know we just did the standard biography off of the website, but why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and we'll kind of go from there.
So I'm from Haley, Idaho originally. It's a small town. If anyone's a skier, it's about 10 miles south of Sun Valley, Idaho. Okay. It was a great place to grow up.
Yeah.
I grew up skiing and then got into horseback riding, and that was kind of it on that. But
Fair.
I went to college back east at Colgate University in upstate New York, and then made my way out to Colorado.
And what'd you major in out in Colgate?
I was an English history double major.
Okay. And did you know when you were in undergrad that law school was kind of the direction you wanted to go, or how did that come about?
I did not. I really had no clue what I was going to do after college, but I did know with my major, I liked writing, I liked researching, and I liked kind of analyzing and coming to some kind of conclusion. And when I was a sophomore and junior, I had some friends that had been upperclassmen that went to law school, and I was talking to them about their experiences, the classes they were taking, their summer internships, and I thought that it might be a good fit for me. And went, applied, came out to DU, and graduated in 2013. And so, no, I had no idea that was what I was going to do. It was just kind of where I ended up, but it's been a good choice. Nice.
It's always interesting. We've had a lot of guests on, and I always ask them that same question to kind of get started. That some people kind of had that direct path, and then some others had the kind of roundabout way of finding the law. Let me ask you this. What brought you to Colorado? Was it DU specifically? Did you know you just wanted to be in Colorado generally, or what brought you out here?
I really didn't know. I actually had every intent of staying back east after college. I grew up out in the West. I obviously loved growing up out here, but I also loved the change of pace and I certainly wasn't in a city back east. I was in a pretty small town in upstate New York. But I really did love just that change of pace and just seeing a different part of the country, experiencing a different culture, even within the same country. And I had every intent of staying back east, especially I was thinking about like North Carolina, Virginia, that area.
Right.
And then when I came out to Denver to look at DU after I was accepted, I just really loved it. And I liked that it was a little bit of a different feel. Again, it was much bigger than anything I'd grown up with. I mean, my county at home is 25,000 people.
Okay. I know all about that. I grew up in Casper, Wyoming. I think our county has about 70,000, but not many more.
Yeah.
Not many more. You really do get that, I think, in the Denver area. You get some of the perks of, a smallish vibe place. And obviously you have the mountains and a lot of outdoor areas, but it's also a lot bigger than, traditional rural America.
And that was very much kind of what kept me here, because I came out because I did really like that feel and I liked being in a little bit of a bigger area. But I loved that, I lived downtown for 4 years, and I loved that I could live downtown, be downtown, experiencing the arts and theater and things like that. But then I could go out and ride my horse on the weekends.
Right.
And that was a huge part of the draw for me. And it was a big part of what kept me here.
Very cool. Very cool. So when you went to law school, did you know, what area or type of law that you wanted to do? Or tell us a little bit about your journey towards general commercial litigation.
That was another one that was a bit of a roundabout way for me. I knew I had an interest in constitutional law because I am a history geek. I was a history major.
Right.
And when I started really getting into, I loved my constitutional law professor, or my first year of law school. That was Professor Alan Chen at DU, who is amazing. And I had him for a couple other classes for the rest of my law school career, and really did enjoy the constitutional civil rights components. And then when I was figuring out what I wanted to do for practice, I decided that really wasn't the right practice area for me for a bunch of different reasons.
Right.
It's, on the defense side, you kind of always feel like you're either in the right or way too much in the wrong. There's not really much of a middle ground.
Fair. That's
And on the plaintiff side, I think the cases that you take in that area it can just be very challenging and very emotional. And I think you really have to have the right personality to work through that. And I wasn't sure I did.
Right.
So I kind of came to employment law first because it does have a lot of the dynamic impact and changing atmosphere and changing law that a civil rights litigation has. But it's not quite as intense, which for me, I found I liked having that little bit more of knowing that there was a company involved, knowing it's usually a company that does want to make the right decisions with employees. If things go bad, there are still some really interesting facts to be involved because people's jobs are important.
Right.
But you still get a very interesting legal framework that all takes place in. And that was really what drew me to that. So that really has been a lot of my focus as I've practiced. And then I've kind of spanned, but that being said, there are a few employment specific firms in Denver. It is there are a lot more that just do general commercial, but then do have some employment as part of what they do, and
Right.
employment as part of their practice. And that's kind of where I keep finding myself. And I do like that variety. And that's the other thing I found for a long time. I was really thinking focus on employment, focus on only that. But as I started practicing more, I found I really do like having the variety of commercial lit. I like being able to I like the business disputes. I like again, the dynamics that go on between different businesses, different people within the businesses, and it really has kept me there and drawn me there.
And that's really interesting. And I'd like to kind of focus in on one of the things that you said as you were kind of deciding on what your career was going to be, was not only, what practice area that you were drawn towards, but also evaluating kind of the emotional burden that comes from that practice area. And that's something that we've talked about with some of our guests on before, whether that's family law, criminal defense, or civil rights. And your example is not every area of the law carries the same emotional burden. And, I think we all envisioned ourselves, winning all of those cases and like helping all of these individuals and being awesome, without recognizing that so many of the times in that situation you lose, and you have to break the news to your clients, like that there is no remedy, that there's nothing better, there's nothing I can do for you. And that can be, very soul crushing, and so I think that that's something that young lawyers maybe, don't always think about is, am I going to enjoy it? But also, am I going to be able to, leave this at work and go home and enjoy my life without kind of having it weigh me down? Was that kind of part of your analysis when thinking about it?
It was definitely part of it. The other part of it for me, I've always been a little bit more drawn to the representing companies instead of individuals. That's not to say I don't represent individuals. I have, and I do enjoy that part of my practice. But it just on the large part, I find the company it's a little bit easier to have those conversations because it is a company. They understand business decisions. They understand where they understand kind of where that decision needs to be made and where it can be made. And that's not to say sometimes those decisions aren't emotional, but sometimes that it just helps having that little bit more of a detachment. And it's just a little bit of a different, I think, environment, and then having just always individual clients that you really do feel strongly about and really do want to help. I think just having that little bit of still a personal involvement and still some emotions, but having that little bit more of just the straight professional, this is business, I think that does help with it too.
Tell us a little bit more about that when you're interacting with companies. Are you usually working with like a general counsel? Are you working with mostly insurance adjusters? Or, obviously a company doesn't really speak in the traditional way. So who are you often working with in your cases to kind of let you know the position of the company or the carrier if it's an insurance case?
That's really varied, and I really don't do a ton of insurance anymore. But certainly at my last firm, we did a lot of communicating with adjusters, and that's again its own kind of different realm and world because you would be retained as insurance defense counsel and have a company contact and an insurance defense contact. So you'd have to kind of balance those roles and everything. Usually at the company, it's someone fairly high up, whether it's a president, whether it's a managing member of an LLC. Those are usually the people I'm working with, or whether it's someone in a particular department that it's, the department that's involved and they're the ones who are just know the most about the situation, and or whether it's someone in HR, whether it's a particular department in the company. Sometimes it's those people, but for the smaller businesses, it's usually a managing member or someone like that.
Interesting. So obviously you've now been doing this for several years. What advice would you give to a law student or a young lawyer who is potentially getting into kind of defense-sided general commercial litigation? Like, what are some stuff that you wish you had known in the beginning that you know now?
I think one thing that I would keep in mind is don't cabin yourself off to possibilities. You never really know where something's going to take you. And I graduated in 2013. I didn't graduate at the worst of the recession, but I certainly graduated when the economy was still recovering and where opportunities for young lawyers were few and far between. And I think I did this as a new lawyer, and I've certainly saw other of my classmates doing this, applying to, only your dream job, only jobs you were really, really interested in. And I wouldn't say don't do that, but I would say don't narrow yourself too much too. And if sometimes there might be a really interesting opportunity that comes up that maybe you say, oh, that's not the exact area I want to practice in, but it might be a really good foothold to either getting your foot in the door, getting that area of practice, getting some experience, and then being able to go to that dream job in 2, 3, 5, 10 years, whenever that ends up being. So I think don't keep an open mind, look at every possibility, and don't be afraid to try something just because it's not quite where you saw yourself.
Always good advice. What is your kind of day-to-day work look like, I guess? Are you mostly reading, writing, or is it a lot of client meetings? Doing civil litigation myself, I know that it's not always the most courtroom heavy type of work, if you will. But what is kind of your general day look like for some of our listeners that may be interested in going this route?
It varies. Recently I have had a lot of client and partner phone calls. And that's just been with where my cases are right now and where things are postured and some of the disputes we have maybe going on in those cases. I have had my last maybe month or so, I feel like I've been on the phone for lengthy amounts of time every day. I've had other times where I've have a big motion for summary judgment or some, I'm preparing for trial, where it's a mix of writing, meetings, whether that's experts, whether that's clients or other witnesses. I would say for the most part, I'm pretty heavy on the writing. That's always been probably the practice of law, the part of the practice of law I've enjoyed the most. And
the English major kind of gave that
exactly.
away, that maybe writing was your thing. That makes sense. I'm a little shocked.
No, it definitely is. And I do have a pretty good track record with my motions practice. And I think that's partly because I do really enjoy it and I do really like it. But I am usually, especially in the civil arena and with being on the more commercial side, generally there is a lot of motions practice involved in whether that's motions in lim, whether that's motions to dismiss or motions for summary judgment. That generally that practice is pretty heavy into that. So I think if you're going into commercial litigation, don't expect to be in the courtroom every day. Certainly we have plenty of cases that go to trial, but really the bulk of what we do is, I would say, client contact, and just day-to-day management and a lot of writing.
Interesting. One other question before we move on to our next topic. How is your, I guess, caseload kind of structured? Or as an associate at, I guess, a mid-sized firm, I would say, are you always, I guess, kind of second sharing under a partner on your cases, or on certain cases, are you lead counsel, or how does that kind of work?
It's a mix of the two. Certainly, I am not lead counsel on the bigger cases we
Right.
have. I am not there yet.
Fair.
Yes, I am. So on the bigger cases, I'm usually second chair. There are some cases where an associate might be really busy and needs a little bit of additional help, and sometimes we structure cases that someone can be brought in and can help with that, and that's been true, I think, at every firm I've been at.
Sure.
On some of the smaller cases, I really am primarily the one running them. I've had a few recently that I really have started seeing through from start to finish,
Cool.
where I was the one who filed the complaint, I was the one who finished mediation, I was the one who got the settlement or got a resolution, or and I've that's really been just in the last year or two that I've started being able to really take a case and run with it. And I've really enjoyed being able to do that.
That's great. Glad that they have that confidence in you. That must feel good, kind of seeing something from, start to finish and kind of seeing how it all plays out and things.
Yeah, I really liked that part. And that was, especially as being a little more defense oriented, that's sometimes you kind of get a case handed to you. I've done a few more cases on the plaintiff side recently, and I really have liked being able to take it from start to finish and just, do the best you can and see where things end up. I've really been enjoyed that aspect of being able to develop a case.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'd like to shift gears here a little bit and kind of move into one of our main topics for today, which is clerking. From your bio, I know that you clerked for Judge Buchanan in the Denver District Court, so a state level trial court. And a lot of our listeners, whether they're law students or young lawyers, may be interested in clerking. So tell us a little bit about how you ended up with Judge Buchanan.
So I was a little unusual because clerking was my second job out of law school. I had a contract position at a firm for my first job out of law school. And when that contract was coming to its end, I was looking for I'd always kind of had an idea that I wanted to clerk, mm-hmm. and was keeping an eye open for those opportunities. And I had a law school friend who was Judge Buchanan's clerk at that time. And I saw that she'd kind of posted on Facebook, I think, saying, if anyone's interested in a clerkship, let me know. So I reached out to her and said, is it your judge? I know you've really enjoyed working for him. And she was like, yes, go ahead and submit your application, and I'll let you know that, I'll let him know that you've applied, and we'll see how it goes from there.
Right.
So it was kind of the traditional, you still apply, but you do have a reference that really does kind of help move things along a little bit. And that was, I think, a part of why I got the interview.
Did you know that you wanted to clerk for a trial court level judge? Did you consider, maybe applying for the Court of Appeals or Colorado Supreme Court? Or tell us a little bit about that thought process.
I did. My 3L year of law school, I honestly just didn't get those applications together, and that's on me. That was something I thought about.
What do they say? 3LOL? I think that was the hashtag. My 3L year was 3LOL.
I've never heard that before, but that is awesome. No, I was actually working 2 jobs my 3L year.
Okay.
So that was part of why I was just so
the opposite of 3LOL.
A little bit,
swamped,
yes.
Swamped. Okay, fair.
And I was keeping an eye out for those opportunities, but just knowing that when I was looking in the spring, and kind of knew that's if I had that would really only happen if I was going to wait another 6 months or so to get my foot in the door for those. So I was really at that time. I really was keeping an eye open more on the state district court judges, and really applying to a bunch of different opportunities. And so it was one, like I said, I knew it was something I had in the back of my mind. I thought this might be the right time to do it, and just kind of had the right opportunity come up.
What is the day-to-day, what does the day-to-day look like while clerking for a state court judge? Are you watching a lot of, I guess, trial and hearings? Is it mostly kind of behind the scenes, reading, writing, things like that? Tell us a little bit about what that looks like.
It was really a mix. And in my experience, there really wasn't any typical day. There were, and I joked that kind of my typical day was I would come in thinking I would work on one thing and it would be completely the opposite. I felt like I never got to the things that were on my to-do list, which I think is a little bit true of being a lawyer in general.
Right. It's just organized chaos. You just go with it. Go with it.
And that is, I would say that's something I've gotten a lot more comfortable with as my career has gone on. That was not something I enjoyed at first.
Right. Yeah. At first, it feels like you're drowning, and you're just like, I'm never gonna get it all done. And then I feel like you get to a point where you're like, okay, this is just how it's gonna be, and you just learn to live with it.
Yeah. So when I started clerking with Judge Buchanan, he was still on his domestic rotation. So I had 3 months of domestic and then about a little under a year and a half on a civil rotation. And I did know that I wanted to do civil lit. So by that point I did at least. So I was, that was actually part of why I was interested in clerking for him specifically, because I knew he was going to be on a civil rotation. In domestic, I think you were in the courtroom the majority of the time, and his division clerk and I would usually split. So she would take mornings and I would take afternoons, or vice versa, because we were in the courtroom frequently, just with the nature of that practice.
Tell us a little bit about the difference between a division clerk and then I guess a law clerk. Like how do they interact, and what's, I guess, kind of the difference?
So the division, and this really does vary from district to district.
Okay.
In Denver, and I'm honestly not sure how things are with COVID, because I know a lot of law clerks have been laid off. I don't think division clerks have right now.
Okay.
In Denver, every judge has a division clerk and a law clerk. And different districts handle that differently. Sometimes there's a law clerk that covers a few different judges. Sometimes there's a law clerk and there's a division clerk that covers a few different judges. It really is structured very differently in different judicial districts. In Denver, generally the law clerks, I think, have a pretty close working relationship with the district or with the division clerks, because generally the law clerks are new attorneys. They're usually the ones a little more involved in the heavy drafting and the research. How involved a law clerk versus a division clerk is in a trial kind of just depends on how they decide to do things between themselves. And depending on the courtroom, the division clerk generally handles more of the scheduling, courtroom settings, some of the more straightforward kind of I don't want to say that, that's not quite right, but some of the more day-to-day things, I think.
Sure.
And while the law clerk is the one usually much more involved in the drafting, if jury trials and jury instructions and things like that. But that being said, you work very closely with the division clerk. You're both very close with the judge, and you really are. It's a collaborative process, and you need to. My judge at one point referred to it as a mini law firm. It was just the three of us in this little law firm, and that was how our courtroom operated.
Right.
And I think that really does vary from judge to judge, and just how every chambers is a little bit different. But that was. We were very collaborative. We worked very closely with each other. We had, there were times I covered for the division clerk. There were times she covered for me, and we made sure that we were kind of up to speed on each other's, I might take lead on a few cases that had big moving parts. She took lead on a few others. We had to be up to speed on each other's cases enough in case one of us was out. But it was, in my experience at least, it was a very collaborative process. And while the law clerk and the division clerk had different roles, they still worked very closely together.
What did you learn clerking for Judge Buchanan? Or I guess another way to phrase this is, do you think it made you a better lawyer, more prepared for practice once you finished your clerkship?
I absolutely think it did. And that was one thing I felt, going from a clerkship to my first associate position, I felt like I had a really good understanding of how a case progressed from start to finish. I felt like I had a really good feel for certain things judges liked and didn't like. For example, motions for reconsideration. I always hated those when those came in the door. And that's not to say that, there aren't occasions when you file them, but that's something that I've certainly tried to keep in mind as I've gone forward.
Fair. The old, how about now? Have you changed your mind?
I think it gave me a really good footing on how to go about some aspects of legal research, because that's just something that you get experience by doing. And you have some really weird issues come up when you're clerking. Like I had one, I think it was a motion to quash service in Wales or something like that. And
interesting.
Oh, it was crazy.
Like Wales over in England area.
Sorry. No, it was New Zealand. It was New South Wales. That's what it was.
Okay.
I misspoke, but yes, it was, and it was something I was looking at it. I was like, how do I even start on this?
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And you have issues like that come up, where you just can't even imagine. And you have to kind of figure out how to handle it, how to, kind of get, maybe, the judge might read the motion and have one opinion. You might read the motion, have another, how to kind of reconcile those opinions and how to come to something that moves the case along, but is, keeping in mind that your role as an impartial third party.
And I guess that's actually something that I was kind of curious about. So, if someone's clerking for, the U.S. Supreme Court, you probably know your judge's, legal philosophy, going in because it's highly publicized. When you're clerking for a state trial court judge where the issues aren't nearly as polarized or political, if you will, how did the decision making, for example, let's say a motion for summary judgment or some other type of dispositive motion, in your setup, would you kind of take a crack at, kind of how you would decide it, or were you, discussing it with the judge before you started writing and the judge said, hey, this is how I think we should come out, and then you would kind of fill it in? Or how did that process work?
It was kind of a mix of the two, and it kind of varied from motion to motion. Usually he would let me at least read through it and take, if not a full first draft, kind of say, hey, this is how I think it should come out. This is, what I think based on what I'm seeing from both sides. I see a huge dispute of fact here. This is an easy denial. Like we would usually kind of start there. And on some of the ones that were more detailed, where there wasn't something obvious or something that was really dispositive, that's where we would really have a lot more of a conversation about, this is what I think the law is showing. This is really what I think the research is showing. I think, this is probably our strongest position. So it really would vary. And there were some that were, very easy. There is a dispute here, easy denial.
Right.
And there were others that were a lot more in depth. There was one I was working on, I remember, and I was really going back and forth and really struggling with how we wanted to finish the order. And I remember going back to the judge and being like, there's no dispute of fact here. Like, party X is entitled to summary judgment. And I think it was the first summary judgment we actually granted.
Wow. And
it was one where it was, it really took getting into the drafting and getting into it, and but still having that ongoing dialogue with the judge about, this is kind of what I'm seeing. This is what I'm seeing. Am I off base in this?
Interesting.
And it did, I think, give a really interesting perspective on how more experienced attorneys look on that, how he looked at that on the bench, and how an associate can do that in a law firm as well, because it is a very similar dialogue in some aspects that you then have with partners saying, this is what I think the research is showing. I don't know if we can do this, or I think we should do this absolutely, and that we're really supported here. And it is, and I think it gives you more confidence in how to do that in a law firm setting too.
Right. That makes sense, that, having that relationship with the judge and trying to, kind of brainstorm, a legal result, it would be very similar to conversations that you would have with a partner on kind of a day-to-day basis. What would you say is your most interesting or favorite clerk story?
Oh, there are a lot.
I know, that's just a nice little softball for you. Let me toss that one up for you.
No, we had 3 really standout trials. And they were all pretty big cases. They were all over, I think the shortest one was 5 days and the longest one was 10 or 11. It was a long trial. But of those 3, I think my favorite clerkship story was from one of those, or was from that trial. It was a pretty big civil case, but it involved a sexual assault. Mm-hmm. So it was it was a very charged atmosphere. Both attorneys on both sides were absolutely fantastic. But there were part of what the plaintiff was trying to prove was that the defendant did have a pattern and practice of how he would kind of approach women and kind of curry their favor and kind of, get into their good graces,
right.
Things like that. And there was a woman and the plaintiff's attorney had a witness testifying on the phone. had kind of we'd already heard the plaintiff's testimony about her situation involved in this. We'd heard kind of references to one other. And another part of the case was whether this woman, whether she was actually a legitimate employee or whether it was kind of a front for him to funnel her money.
Okay.
So it was a very nuanced aspect, and that was a large part of what this testimony was going towards. So this woman is testifying on the phone, and she's saying, this is how he met me. This is how he kind of, we got to be friends. This is how, I got to know him a little bit better. This is how he ended up hiring me to come work at his company. And it was a very similar story to what the plaintiff said. And the plaintiff's attorney goes, and did he ever question your business decisions, or was it more of a legitimate employment case? And she goes, oh no, he absolutely, respected my business decisions, respected my judgment, with one exception. And that was with this other one employee. And, I didn't want, and so the follow-up question is, well, what about this other employee? Oh, well, she'd kind of come from the same situation. And I didn't really want how we met and how I came to work at this company to get out there. And I was really worried she would say something like that. And I think Maria felt the same way. And you could just see the entire courtroom go, who's Maria? And we had, quite a few other people from the court coming and watching. We had the whole jury. And it was such a good example of how to really build up testimony, how to really, show your point, and how to do it just through questions.
Right.
It was so artfully done. And just the whole set of facts was just so bizarre that then when it got to, and Maria felt the same way, you could just see everyone's face
just
go,
like, wait, what?
Wow.
That's really interesting. Really interesting. Before we move on from clerkship, I'd like to talk a little bit about the application process. So I know you said you had a friend working there, and that was part of the in. But what was the rest of the application process like, either with Judge Buchanan or some of the other applications that you may have put in? Is it, just like a resume? Is there like writing samples? Were there interviews, or just kind of tell us a little bit about that process?
And the answer is all of the above. And I'm not sure how different it is now. I would think it's probably pretty similar. The state district court judges have a section of the website where you can just check pretty regularly for open clerkships. And I unfortunately do not remember the name of the website, but I know it's not difficult to find
right.
on the court.
You got Google, listeners. Use it.
Yes. So, and I think I submitted a resume, writing sample, cover letter, and law school transcript. And I think that was pretty standard for Denver. I think you did need to submit all 4 of those pieces.
Okay.
To be considered.
Any advice you would give to a law student, or I guess in your situation, even a young lawyer who is looking at, becoming a clerk?
I think I thought it was a great position. I think it's something that, especially if you want to go into litigation, I think it's something that I wouldn't say every young lawyer should consider, but certainly if you are interested in litigation, I think it is a really good place to start. And I think it gives you a really firm footing. And I think it gives you a really interesting insight to what the judicial process is. And because you have, my judge said several times, you're not going to know how every judge is going to rule, but how one judge in Denver would rule on certain things. And, that can inform you, and that can inform you and your clients and the partners you work for as you move forward. So, and especially, I don't think as much on the transactional side, although I think that still has some benefits too.
Right.
But I think certainly if you're considering litigation, it's a really good place to start.
Do you still stay in touch with Judge Buchanan? Like, do you consider him a mentor, or?
I do, yes. And he and I, it's been a little bit odd with COVID. We usually do grab lunch every couple of months, kind of catch up. If I was over in Denver District Court, I would usually stop by his chambers and say hi. Obviously haven't been able to do that recently.
Right. This whole global pandemic thing, just throwing a wrench in everybody's plans.
Yes, but no, I have stayed in touch with him. I've stayed in touch with our division clerk there as well. And I've stayed in touch with a few of our interns or fellows too. So it was a really good way to get not just a mentor relationship, and to really feel like you really do have someone you can keep going back to with that. But, I had a lot of friends who were clerks for other judges at that time. It was a pretty good group and pretty tight knit while I was there. And I have plenty of people from who were other clerks I've stayed in touch with. So it was a really collegial environment. I think that, that also offers a network and just a good professional friends to move forward with as your career continues.
Well, one of the things that I think we've talked about, I think on literally every episode, is the importance of mentorship and in finding those mentors. And, judges make great mentors because obviously they're doing something right in their career to make it to the bench. And usually they have a lot to offer to young attorneys. So for our listeners, one great way to get a mentor is to consider clerking and developing that relationship with a judge. I'd like to shift gears a little bit to our final topic today and talk a little bit about CBA YLD. Obviously, you are on the executive council, and I think have been for quite a while now. Why don't you tell us a little bit about why you decided to get involved with the YLD?
So I, again, kind of the power of networking. I had a friend who'd been on YLD and had been chair a few years ago. And when I started, and I admittedly was not very active when I was clerking, in part because, I wasn't quite sure how to get involved and still be a law clerk and be kind of impartial and have balance. Right. And that was something that I feel like a lot of law clerks struggled with or kind of knew was something they would have to balance. And
that makes sense.
So it kind of made a little sense just to wait until I got into practice. But when I started in practice, I was really starting to think about how I wanted to be involved, what I wanted to do, and organizations that I thought would be meaningful. And I had a friend who had been on Young Lawyers Division previously, and she talked to me about her experience, and I thought that it would be a good fit for me because I thought that having gone through an economy that was a rough start, knowing the networking contacts that I'd had that had helped me get interviews, get positions, or understand the networking process better, I thought that I could offer something to young lawyers who are also going through that process because it's not easy. And I know that I'm a little bit shy, I'm a little bit introverted, and it is hard for me to put myself out there. And I want to be able to be a resource for people who are kind of in that same position too. And especially for someone who was still focusing a practice and things like that, and not, didn't have necessarily a section to go to, or a section that I knew for sure I wanted to be involved in. I thought YLD was a really good start to meet more people who are in kind of the same position as me, and then be able to help other people who had been in the same position or who were in the same position as I had been, help them along on their path as well.
What types of, programming or activities or initiatives have you been a part of since joining the YLD?
I've probably been most involved with the CLEs and some of the fitness things we do. The first year I was on the board, we did a full day nuts and bolts litigation CLE. It was a big hit. It was something that we were kind of trying to revive from a few years ago. And we did it 2 years in a row. It was a really great success both years. And this year would have been the third year, and that has unfortunately been a bit postponed.
Yes, unfortunately, that one will not be happening this year, but it is going to be brought back in 2021. It's going to be focused on appellate and post-trial issues. So if you're listening and interested in that, Justice Melissa Hart is going to be our keynote speaker on that. So if you're interested in any of that, stay tuned to the YLD Facebook page, Instagram page. There should be a lot of really cool things about that. And then tell us a little bit about the fitness stuff that CBA YLD has been doing in this time of COVID. Staying healthy is probably more important than ever.
Yes, agreed. So for the last couple of years, YLD has really tried to get some fitness groups going and have, not necessarily like a consistent group, consistent running group, although we have done kind of running groups every once in a while. But we've done a few running events. So we've done Cherry Creek Sneak regularly for the last few years. And from that, this year in particular, YLD had a springboard and has started doing a couple different series of fitness events that are fitness classes, nutrition. We're working on one right now that's kind of a mindfulness meditation type one. That one's still in the works, but I think it'll be a really great event when we finish it. It's because we do, aside from COVID, which is obviously a huge impact right now, this is a demanding profession. There is really something to be said for work-life balance. and for being able to, go take a 20-minute run if you've had a long day at work. And I think that's something that falls by the wayside so easily, and it's become even more important now. So we have, we've had some yoga. We've had, for COVID in particular, we've had HIIT impact training classes. We've had yoga. We've had a bunch of outdoor events, and it's all been very geared towards not just COVID, but also trying to just generally make young lawyers remember that is, or help young lawyers remember that this is important. You need to care for yourself too. And we're in the business of caring for other people so much that's a really easy thing to forget. And that's something that we don't think anyone should.
Yeah. And I think that's a really great point, because you don't want to get burned out, and it's not good for you. It's not good for your friends and family who may not appreciate it. And it's not good for your clients ultimately. If you're not in a good place, then you're not going to be, you're the best person you can be to assist your clients with those matters. I'm not 100% sure of what day this podcast will be dropping, and so I believe our next event will likely have already happened, but it should be dropping before December, and there will be, I believe there is a Snowshoe Event scheduled for Lake Brainerd.
December 5th, yes.
December 5th. So this episode will definitely be out before then, so if you're listening and you're like, let's do some snowshoeing, definitely come join us. It's also going to be super easy. You can, when you sign up, actually request snowshoes. And so if you don't own snowshoes or haven't snowshoed, not a problem. We can get those handled for you.
And there should also be hot chocolate there.
There will be hot chocolate there. So if you're not sold on snow or, physical exertion, you should probably be sold on hot chocolate, because that's always a win in the middle of a Colorado December. As we kind of wrap up here, I did have a few more questions about the YLD. Within the YLD, so obviously, being on the executive council is a leadership role kind of in and of itself. But I know that you actually served some time as an officer for the YLD. Tell us a little bit about that and kind of leadership opportunities on top of just being on the executive council.
So I was the secretary for 3 years. In that role, I was taking our minutes, helping getting our minutes approved every month, in addition to, fielding questions that came up about, what's happened at meetings, helping coordinate with with some of our section liaisons, things like that. And then that has kind of morphed into some other opportunities for me. So, for example, when we had about a year and a half ago now, we partnered with the ABA, American Bar Association, Young Lawyers Division, to do a continuing conference that they've done annually for now maybe 4 or 5 years. It started in Colorado in Aspen. That was the first year they did it. And it started as the Four Corners Regional Summit. And every year it kind of added another state or two. So we've gotten to where it's the ABA Young Lawyers Division Mountain States Annual Conference.
Nice.
And about a year and a half ago, it was in Steamboat Springs. It was the first year I'd gone. It was absolutely fantastic, a great event. I helped coordinate some of the CLEs that were involved. It was, I think, 2 days of programming. I think we got there on Thursday. There was kind of a welcome reception. We had 2 days of full CLEs. I think it was, 14 credits or so, and then had Sunday to everyone could kind of do their own thing or do things in a group if you wanted to, and just really explore Steamboat and enjoy the town on the last day and kind of relax after a very intense couple days of the conference. But I helped coordinate the CLEs. I helped get approval for not just Colorado, but some of the other states. I helped coordinate some of the speakers, helped with introductions in some of the presentations in that regard. And that is an opportunity I absolutely would not have had if not for CBA YLD, because that was, we've had a few members that have been really active with ABA. We've partnered now with that event for 4 or 5 years now, and it's been a great event. It's been an absolutely fantastic event, I think, every year.
You also can't go wrong having a conference or convention in Steamboat.
No.
I have had the pleasure of attending 1 or 2 there, and what a great town to have.
It was fantastic, yeah.
When you're going to be doing legal learning, legal networking, and kind of, getting ideas for upcoming terms and stuff like that. Always good to be in the beautiful mountains.
Yeah, and the other thing about it is from some of the experiences I'd had on CBA YLD, at least kind of knew how to go about, getting CLE approval, who to talk to, how to start coordinating some of those events. And so it's one of those, if you start, things kind of springboard and other opportunities arise.
So I kind of end each of these episodes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was really a pleasure speaking with you today. I generally end these kind of the same way. If anyone who's listening is interested in learning more about clerking or general commercial litigation or horses or living near ski resorts, is it okay if people reach out to you?
Absolutely, yes.
And what is your email address, or what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Best way is usually either email or these days my cell. My email is Tanya, Tanya, .sevy, SEVY at moyewhite.com. And my cell is 208-720-0055.
Well, there you go, guys. No prank texts, but other than that, reach out. Thank you so much, Tanya, for coming on the show. It was a real pleasure, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you for having me.
Get legal with it.